teachers! Today we're going to talk about how to evaluate an intermediate repertoire series. By repertoire series, I'm talking about a series of leveled books that contains historical repertoire from the Baroque, Classical, Romantic, and then 20th and or including 21st century music for our students who've completed or are nearing the end of a method book series, an elementary series, but who are not yet advanced level pianists. So today, by way of example, I'm going to be using Jane Magrath's Masterwork Classics series. This is published by Alfred, and it's probably at the top of my list of most used series. I have many others that I enjoy using, but this probably comes to the top. And so hopefully you've already downloaded my checklist or my list of questions about how to evaluate this. Yours might look a little different than mine if the design has been updated. If you don't have that checklist, please look in the description of this video and that'll take you to download that. So I would highly recommend whenever evaluating a series that you have many of the books in front of you. Today I have Masterwork Classics levels 5 through 9 sitting here on my rack. I have used levels 1 through 4 in the past. I just don't have those in my personal library right now because I sold them to students. But what I did was I went on Alfred's website and I just printed off the table of contents for those levels so that I still had it in front of me and I could think about the series as a whole. And since I have all of these books and I've used those lower levels before, I'm very familiar with generally how the series works and all of that. So let's get to it. The first category for evaluation is the physical characteristics of the book. And you might have already noticed when I held up level 5 here that the cover is coming off of this book. Now this has been well used by people in my family and me in my teaching, but this is a thing that does happen with this series. The cover falls off. It's a normal staple bound book, not spiral bound. The paper quality is just fine. It's white. It tends to hold up really well. The cover just falls off. One of the best parts of this series is that it comes with, if you buy the version with the CD, or perhaps they will change it to a digital download in the future, if you buy that, then your students have a professional level performance of all of the pieces in the book. And that's one of the things I love. I am definitely more prone to buy a series that contains recordings of professional performances of the pieces in it. I find that the engraving in general in this series is pretty clear. Some of the pages look just a little bit squished. This is a Beethoven sonatina that's a little bit close together. But in general, it's a nice layout, clear print, all those kinds of things. A normal size of book. It's not massive or tiny. And I feel like for the cost, which generally in US dollars runs from about $10 to $12 for these books, I feel like the cost is generally appropriate, totally affordable, but for the amount of pages that you're getting in a book. Okay, so let's go on next to repertoire selections. Does the repertoire appeal to today's student? Well, that partly depends on whether or not your students enjoy classical music, but that's a separate conversation from today. I find in general one of the reasons I do like this series is that I like the repertoire in here. I like teaching it. There's a lot of really wonderful pedagogical repertoire in here, such as things by minor masters like Gurlitt, Heller, Kabalevsky, Khachaturian, all those really great pedagogical composers who knew how to write for piano students. I also really like the sonatina movement selections that show up in the middle levels of this. I like the Baroque pieces, lots of Bach little preludes and things that are just fun and enjoyable to play and have a lot of pedagogical value. And in general, I've found that my students feel that way about these books as well. One of the questions I have on this list is how standard is the repertoire? Meaning, does this have all the most standard sonatina movements, or is there a little bit more creative choice in here? I would place this series somewhere in the middle. There are quite a few standard selections. The easiest Bach inventions show up in level 7, 8, 9, easiest Chopin preludes, things that everyone recognizes and that we frequently teach. And I do like that there's a lot of standard 20th century repertoire, like I said, Bartók, Kabalevsky, Khachaturian. However, I feel like Jane Magrath does a good job of also incorporating some lesser known things, especially, as I said, in that pedagogical vein. So I would place this somewhere in the middle. It's not the most creative choice of repertoire, but it's also not the most standard either. Does the selection of repertoire favor one time period over another? In general, I would say no. However, one thing I have noticed about these books is that Magrath does include a lot of 19th century repertoire. I'm not sure how well, see, once again, this cover has fallen off. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but if you kind of just survey the table of contents, that Romantic period is the biggest one. And I think that's actually an excellent choice because, frankly, the 19th century is the era of the piano. And if you surveyed people who enjoy piano music about their favorite pieces or composers, they're probably going to say things from the 19th century like Chopin, right? That's the era of the piano. And that's where we get a lot of our technical development. I would never want to raise an intermediate student on entirely 19th century repertoire, but I think if I am going to err on the side of having more selections, that is probably the century I would also choose to include more of. Some repertoire selections, different books do different things, so that's just one thing to kind of look out for. And then the other main thing to kind of evaluate is how good is the sequencing of repertoire. So if you're looking at, how does level 1 move into 2, move into 3, move into 4, and so on from there. And I personally find that this series does that very well. There isn't a huge jump between levels. Each level has a few selections that are a little bit easier and a little bit more challenging. And I like that about this series. But that's something that you're going to want to look at on your own in each series that you're using and make sure that you feel that way about what you're doing. Okay. One of my big beefs with historical repertoire collections is the quantity and the quality of the editing. And that's one reason why I enjoy Jane Magrath's publications so much. I happen to just agree with her editing much of the time. So for instance, I just really like her Baroque editing. I like where she puts the articulation. I like generally her ornament realization options, which she does give to you, which is very, very helpful. I find I like most of her fingering suggestions, but I'm a teacher who does not feel bound to use the fingering that is included in the book. So I don't pay attention to that as much as I do just make sure that it's generally helpful for my students. But that said, I like Magrath's fingering overall. The one thing that is not true of this series, it's not clear where things are edited and where things are not. So Magrath does include slurs, say in her Bach pieces, or other articulation marks that are not actually in Bach's writing. So if that is something that is helpful for you to know, I would just encourage you to own an Urtext version of the Inventions, the Little Preludes, the Notebook for Anna Magdalena, all those standards, and just know for yourself what is truly included in the Urtext. Some editions, very, very few, have gray markings for editing or are just very, very, very minimal in their markings for that editing. And that's not true of this series. She does mark it up, but I tend to agree with her articulation, so it doesn't bother me in this particular series. Okay, our last category is the pedagogical material that's provided by the editor and printed in the series that's not part of the actual pieces that are printed in there. So there is a companion book that goes with each of these levels, and it's not included in this book. So that's actually one thing that's difficult about this. If you want the performance and practice suggestions, then you have to buy a separate book. I don't do that because, as I tell my students, I've been teaching piano for 1,000,000 years, and I know all of those things. But for younger, less experienced teachers, I would highly recommend, at the very least, owning those yourself. It's not a big investment. They're not expensive books. You can buy them at discount from the publisher or when you get a sale from a distributor, and really using those to help yourself improve your intermediate teaching. But they're not included in here. The one thing that the editor does include, which I love, is right after the table of contents, there is a suggested order of study. She splits this into 2 columns. Baroque and Classical is on the left, and romantic and contemporary are on the right. So you could literally just start here with the first 2 pieces listed in those columns when starting this level with your student, and then work down the column. Now, I certainly do not teach every piece in one of these books. I might average half or a little bit more than half of the pieces in a book for a student per level. So you don't want to literally just go straight down from top to bottom, but that's the order that can help you. You also don't have to follow this order. It's just a helpful tool. You might have a student who needs to work on a particular technique, and so you're going to jump ahead just a little bit as you kind of focus on some particular thing that they need to work on, and then you can come back. It's just a massively helpful thing when you open up a book for the first time and you think to yourself, I don't even know where to begin. Because the books themselves, all of the pieces are laid out in essentially chronological order. So if you start at the beginning of the book and work your way to the back, you're going to end up doing all the Baroque pieces and never doing anything else. Does the editor provide any analysis or practice suggestions? Yes, in those other books, the practice and performance. Are there any technical warm-ups or other exercises? Only minimally in that other book, as I said. And then do these books provide any historic context, or composer biographies or things like that? No, not in this particular book. That's not to say that Magrath doesn't ever include those in her other series. She does, just not in this particular series. So if you want to do anything like including illustrations of harpsichords or composer biographies, you will have to outsource that to use this series. Last thing on that list is, does the editor provide realization of ornaments? Yes, and that's one of the big reasons I recommend this series. When you open up to a Bach Little Prelude or Invention, she will give you in the footnotes an option of how to realize the trill, how to play the trill, and I really like that, especially for teachers who just feel uncomfortable making those decisions themselves. I hope this has been helpful for you, and I wish you all the best in your intermediate piano teaching. It's my favorite level. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my website for more information. Thank you.